Solve it. What we've always been good in American society is solving it. We talk about it for a while. We do great soliloquies. But when we are at our best, we are solving it. For example, presidential debates in 2012, get rid of the panelists. Either do town halls, but get rid of the time limits. Let the two candidates, for 2 hours at a time, go back and forth without a moderator, and let the American people see how well they can think. Number two, for the newscasts, you can actually say that for half an hour, you don't need to have commercials, so you actually get 30 minutes of news rather than 22 and a half minutes of news. Number three, in the British system, the Prime Minister has to defend his or her point of view in Parliament. Not that we should do a parliamentary-style democracy, but do you realize how many people tuned in last year when Barack Obama went to the House Republican retreat? Everybody was talking about it because they never saw it before. Let the president and the congressional leaders actually have these discussions back and forth so you're not getting the information from talk radio or cable news. These are solutions on a macro level. On a micro level, we're talking about how we're going to change the schools, but let's not just do dollars and cents. Let's do the content. Let's make a decision as a society what should be taught. And then not only holding teachers accountable, let's hold parents accountable in that process. These are specific things that we can do. Let's do it, Richard.
You got it.
I'd like to drag the conversation back just a little bit, and that's to what we're going to do to educate our children rather than change the political debate, although that's important in 2012. While we demonize the web, and you have very eloquently with the comments that were made and all of that, it is a tremendous tool for us. All of us that sit here this morning can go home this afternoon and learn more on the Constitution of the United States and the workings of our government the way it should be, okay, with a session at the web than you ever learned in high school, than perhaps you ever learned in college, okay? We need to take these tools and use them to our benefit. Which of us that are grandparents have ever tried to call our teenage grandchildren and find that the phone that goes on incessantly and says, "This is Holly, please call me back," okay? But if we text them, what happens? You know more than get your thumb off the text, and for us old guys, that's a challenge. Get your thumb off the text and they've answered you, okay? We need to take the tools that are available to us, educate the teachers if that's necessary, and use the curriculum that's available. I challenge you this afternoon to go home and dial up the U.S. Constitution. A ream of educational material comes forward to you, okay? You can read all 13 of Thomas Paine's books on the crisis. You can go on and on and on that you all know about and everything else. We need to harness those tools if we're going to educate our children and utilize those tools. It isn't like me sitting around the kitchen table in the 1940s with my father saying, "I can't listen to the Lone Ranger on the radio." Things have changed, okay? And we need to adapt to those changes. Yes, there are things that need to be done in our government and all that, but if we're going to educate our children to come along and be the leaders of the future, okay, we have to work with them and adapt to those changes, and we have to use the tools that are at our hands. In fact, at their hands, they're way in front of us. We do own the technology. We should use the technology, and we should teach the children that the things that come on there that Frank was talking about are inappropriate. They're not decent. They're not to be put into the dialogue that we go through. And the kids will respond. So I think that's a challenge. Another thing that Thomas Paine says, our tribal souls.
Thanks. John?
That's very well.
Just a second before Rick.
Oh, John over here wants to interject.
It's no surprise that Richard Dreyfuss and I perhaps have some differences in politics and economics, but I think there's some common ground, which is he mentions how the debate on issues like free trade have been circumscribed. And I think we both share a healthy suspicion of elites shushing voters like children and saying, no, you can't think that. That's simplistic, or that's racist, or that's parochial. Look, there is a legitimate debate on free trade. I fall on one side, but I don't think we've allowed people who have suspicions about it enough space in the civic square. The same thing with immigration. I'm more pro-immigration than not, but we have demonized too many people who have concerns about that. In addition, the Federal Reserve. nobody understands the Federal Reserve, but there's a lot of suspicion about it. Do we want a centralized banking system of unelected bureaucrats making these decisions? We have two members of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors in the last week, Mr. Fisher from Dallas and Mr. Prosser from Philadelphia, who have openly challenged Ben Bernanke's quantitative easing, QE2, which I think really stands for the Titanic. I think there hasn't been nearly enough debate about that. Most people don't even know about it. There are a lot of issues in which our leaders shush us like children and say, no, there's a politically correct view, whether it's from the right or the left. Both the left and the right, and in fact many American people were suspicious of the bailouts. But the elite said, no, we have to do this. And we're hearing the same thing now about the debt limit. 71% of the American people don't want to raise the debt limit. I agree it eventually has to be raised. But what else should we be talking about? But we're told, no, just shut up and raise the debt limit. So I think Richard and I both agree that elites, whether from the left or the right, often try to circumscribe the debate. If you circumscribe the debate and say your point of view is not part of the debate, no wonder we have cynical people who drop out of the system and don't want to get involved in politics or civics.
Right. Bob?
I would argue that those elites that you talk about are often fueled by things like the Supreme Court decision last year on Citizens United. If you look over the last 20 years, money is influencing who gets elected and who plays that role as elites. And the vote last year, 1 year ago, was 5-4 that corporations were persons and that corporations and labor unions could use their corporate treasuries in political campaigns. No one believed prior to that decision that corporations and labor unions didn't have impact on the debate. But now that money is flowing into the system, and I know earlier you said it was only a little bit of money, but when that money is used and targeted on television, on radio, and on e-advocacy, you can get persons elected who come, some as Tea Party members, some with principles and ideals to try to change the system, but often they're consumed and caught up from day one by special interest. And I would argue that the special interest money in politics has provided us with a set of elites that you talk about who were bought and paid for by special interest. And until we get to the point where average ordinary citizens can have a role in politics, as our founding fathers intended, I think we're going to be in trouble as a nation.
Rick, you were saying
you're about to interject in San Diego, Rick or Richard.
For those of you who don't know about this particular ruling, People United Citizens United was the 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court that allowed corporations to give an unlimited amount of money to political campaigns. And they made no distinction at the time between American corporations or foreign corporations, which meant, in essence, at the time, that Sony or Mercedes-Benz could put enough money into the system and buy the presidency of the United States. Now, two things that come along with this decision and are not quite as visible are the amount of money given by corporations is in fact untraceable and unauditable. You can't audit because they don't have to say at the bottom of the ad, this ad was paid for by Citizens United or by Sony Corporation. It can say this organization is for the protection of chipmunks and we're in favor of so-and-so's candidacy for president. And at the bottom, it only has to say it's paid for by Citizens for Chipmunks.
Which is no different than unions.
And I would say any institution that isn't named should be named, and foreign companies have no business being allowed to buy the government of the United States, and you have no business allowing it. And you have many means open to you to limit that ruling, to guide that ruling, to prohibit certain things. You have to understand what we're all saying here, which is that we are the government. The government is not something over there. It's right here. And we have to take control of it. And if we think that the amount of money that has been spent on American political presidential campaigns has been a little out of whack. Just wait until 2012 or 2016, because you're going to be hearing about $50 billion and $75 billion, because we're worth it. We are an incredibly powerful, incredibly resourceful, incredibly rich country. And if we put ourselves on the auction block every 2 or 4 years, you're going to see some pretty high bidding. And those that are doing the bidding have very little interest in the common welfare of the people who live in Nebraska or Flint, Michigan. So this is up to you to change. And what I was going to say before was, there's such a thing in America as being stupid about our history. And Jay Leno makes all these jokes about how stupid we are. And he may be right or wrong. But there's another thing. Everyone knows the cultural mythology of America. No matter who you are, unless you were brought here against your will, or you were found here and then killed, every family in this room has a story that is basically the story of the person sitting next to them. And that is, someone in your family's past fled oppression overseas, and that oppression was caste and class designed by wealth, and they came here for safe haven and a second chance. This ruling by the Supreme Court, which allowed money, wealth, to design access to a new power structure, literally overturned the War of Independence. And you could say that it made George Washington turn his sword over to Lord Cornwallis.
We do not necessarily agree.
You may...
I thought this was to be... You were going to...
And we don't have to agree. You go ahead.
No, I'm curious to what you... I want to learn from what you...
Well, that's the context of the debate. We don't have to agree.
That's right.
We need to debate it.
But I didn't know this was going to be a political partisan conversation. I want to hear what you
That's not a political part. That's not partisan.
Having George Washington turn over in his grave, that's political.
No, wait. Partisan is Republican-Democrat.
Right.
And I'm talking about a ruling of the Supreme Court.
That you say is like the biggest ruling ever. Come on, give me a break.
Okay, come on, give me a break.
Time.